Warning: the contents of tonight's episode contains strong language and may not be suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Around the Ropes radio show. Here are your hosts, John Blaine, Ray from Boston, and Jay. With special guest appearances by Bobby Fish and Kevin Wilson. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Simply Green.
1, 2, 3.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Around the Ropes radio show. Guys, if you guys have been following the show for the last 5 years, you know we work with a lot of companies. Obviously, New Jersey, Connecticut, Newark, New York, you know, the whole 9 yards. But guys, we're moving out west here, and this is a company that I'm actually honored and I'm very privileged that he's giving us some time tonight. But you guys know we always talk about NWA on this show. Joining the show for the first time, he is the head honcho, the man behind it all, the man who runs NWA New Mexico, the one and only Fred Slow. Fred, thank you for joining us. How you doing this evening, my friend?
Yeah, hi, hello, and thank you, John. Thank you for having me on the program. Thank you for having me here on the Around the Ropes radio show. How fortunate the NWA is to have this opportunity.
Like I said, I'm very privileged by this. But before we get into NWA, because believe me, there's a lot of stuff that I want to get into with the NWA. What got you into pro wrestling as a fan? How did you see the early days of, you know, what got you into it?
That's a great question. I've been asked this kind of a lot, you know, in the world of pro wrestling, and I give the exact same answer every time. As I got into it the exact way everyone else did. You know, as a kid, you know, I was a fan of storytelling. I was a fan of athleticism, and that was featured, you know, weekly. You know, thanks to and rest in peace, you know, WCW and Ted Turner. That was, you know, in due part to WWF at the time, now WWE. And then all the at arm's length growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, regional opportunities with promotions because of the influence Harley Race had in that community. So with that said, yeah, I grew up as a kid watching it. And then, you know, as many get away from it as they get a little bit older, you know, I necessarily didn't. You know, I still really enjoyed the storytelling. I think it's a big part of the reason I've been in talk radio and television all the years that I have is because I really identified with the storytellers behind the microphone in pro wrestling. And those storytellers inspired me to become a storyteller myself.
And that was one thing, you know, that I've always preached doing the show, like I mentioned, for 5 years now, is storytelling to me is a huge part.
Yeah.
I can sit there and I can watch a match, and it can be two guys who are not doing any moves. But if they're telling a story, you can have me intrigued in it. That's like the same thing, like I'll equate to baseball for a second.
Sure.
I'm more intrigued by a 1-0 game than a 15-13 game.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear that. You know, I think everyone, and that's what we're so fortunate, you know, with this form of entertainment is how you can, as a fan, you know, find the aspect of it that you really enjoy, right? And because of that, you can take from. But I'll tell you the greatest story ever told, and it was a high-scoring affair, is Game 6 of the 2011 World Series. You know, to me, there's nothing more entertaining than the back and forth and the anything can happen, and that was true for that game. But you know, as much fun as I have had, you know, watching or my time broadcasting, you know, the 1-0 barn burners that you're talking about in baseball as well. And I think that's the thing that's so fabulous about this form of entertainment is it's got a little bit of a different flavor for everyone who likes different flavors.
Exactly. So growing up, were you more WWF or WCW?
I don't know if I had an allegiance. I was a big fan of being able to connect with my friends at the time, you know, so I very much enjoyed the social aspect of it. I was not a sit at home and watch it solo. I was, you know, go over to my buddy's house or have my buddy over and the fellowship that surrounded pro wrestling. So I didn't have a loyalty to either brand. But the thing I enjoyed the absolute most, and the thing I still enjoy today the most, is the fellowship that surrounds fandom. So I'm going to say that I'm a fan of fans.
And it's one thing though, because obviously me being a fan of this crazy sport for as long as I've been, we always talk about fan bases being interesting to handle, and the comment always is pro wrestling fans are always the toughest to handle.
Yeah, I guess. I've been in radio for, what is this? I'm 41, so 23 years. That's crazy to think about. And, I've been so fortunate to go to a bunch of Super Bowls, and I've been so fortunate to go to World Series and World Cups and all kinds of cool stuff. And I'll tell you, the fandom that exists in pro wrestling fan is not greater than the fandom that exists in a BTS fan or a Garth Brooks fan or a Ravent Oakland, LA, now Vegas Raiders fan. But I'm going to say that the fans that pro wrestling does attract, pro wrestling's fortunate to have them. Because if they were to dedicate that fandom elsewhere, wherever else received that fandom would receive it in just as much stride. So I'm going to say pro wrestling fan, absolutely no different than fervent fan of Magic the Gathering or the Marvel universe or anything else, but pro wrestling fan, equally passionate.
I just think the issue, and I see what you're saying. My thing is when you get this tribalism going,
Sure.
And especially now with you have AEW and you have WWE, and you have certain aspects of the internet wrestling community who, if you're a fan of AEW, it's like, well, you can't be a fan of WWE. And then if it's your fan of WWE, well, how can you be a fan of AEW? And going back to what you said, being a fan of the fans, that's kind of how I look at it. I look at it as, I'll watch whatever's on TV.
Yeah, well, and I think anyone who tries to gatekeep anyone from enjoyment is maybe not necessarily a resource that I would lean to, as it relates to not just pro wrestling, but anything in life. If I'm eating a Little Debbie snack cake and you tell me I can only have Hostess, you and I might not continue that conversation.
Hey, Debbie snack cakes aren't bad.
No, I mean, different strokes, right? Well, and that's the thing I have found in wrestling is, and I think it's, true for everything. We can go back to, and I don't know if you're my age, but, when I was growing up, there was a TRL battle between NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. And
Fred, I'm 33 years old, so I'm kind of in that.
But you're a shade under it. But to like communicate, the fandom that existed, and that that's girl camp, right? But like to see them, try to convince each other, there's something fun there. I'm a fan of that, But I'm absolutely. I've never lambasted or stayed away from. The only show I watch regularly is NWA Power. The WWE's great. AEW's great. Some of the stuff New Japan does is really, really good. I'm a big fan of some indie stuff. I'm a big Rocky Mountain Pro guy. I think Rocky Mountain Pro does so good. They're not an NWA territory, but they have a really good product. But there's something fun in all of that. I think Phoenix Championship Wrestling has a really good product. I think there's really good pro wrestling out there. But the only thing I watch regularly is NWA Power. Hey, but that's because my friends are there, John. I get to watch my friends.
Exactly. That's really the big thing that matters, especially like somebody like you who's been doing this for a while, me as well. And I look at TV, I'm like, oh, I just saw that guy 2 weeks ago on an independent show.
Yeah.
Or I know that person or whatnot. But I want to get into what got you into wanting to become a promoter.
That's a great question. There was and forget my hoarse throat here. We just had a show last week and I haven't recovered. But the world of pro wrestling, I guess called me. And I don't know. I've been in television and radio forever, and primarily radio. And we were at a Super Bowl. This would have been the Super Bowl in Phoenix. So whatever year that was, 2021. And yeah, I guess it would have had to be because we just had our 3-year anniversary at the time of this recording. Last Saturday, and we were out there, me, myself, and a guy, my business partner, Aaron Burnett, who has got, 35 years in radio. And I had a relationship with Hobo Hank, and Hobo Hank is a legend in the Southwest. Hobo Hank is an Albuquerque native, and this year is his 30th year in professional wrestling. Started when he was 15 years old, which is just now illegal, but incredible. And he's been out a long time. And Aaron Burnett, my business partner, he runs the management group for the El Rey Theater here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it's a beautiful historic building. It's over 100 years old. It has had some of the greatest concerts you could ever attend, and just really smart as far as destination theaters. And with that said, I said to him, "Hey, I feel like Albuquerque, New Mexico, which had some backyard promotions at the time, and because it's a commission state, it's difficult because the commission, and we were talking about gatekeeping a little bit ago, they have a lot of obstacles in the way, regulations, including, ticket fees and including regulatory fees and including government oversight. And I don't know where you stand, but I'd like for there to be less oversight in my personal business. And, with that said, there are a lot of reasons why people didn't run. That's why we didn't have pay-per-view or broadcast television of pro wrestling until this past year, in the last 25 years here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, because the New Mexico State Athletic Commission would dock 10% of your advertising revenue, which is kind of an incredible thought, right? So with that said, the three of us sat down and said, how can we create pro wrestling and can we do it really well ourselves? And we did. We were real lucky. And Hobo Hank had access to a lot of really good talent in the Southwest, and we had access to a really good venue in the Southwest in the El Rey Theater here in Albuquerque. And then I've been so very fortunate to be a guy who always punches it across the goal line. I think historically you've heard of a lot of guys who are quote unquote idea guys. You've heard of a lot of guys who can, kind of get you to the 1 yard line. But, if we need a contract signed, or if we need a gig made, or if we need a connect made or whatever, willing am I, to make that extra effort. So the three of us came together, and now we're 3 years later, and we've added a couple more business partners, and we've added a ton of talent, John. I think we've had 95 talents compete on the NWA New Mexico roster over the course of these 3 years. And then the number of people who produce the product is, definitely higher than that, which is kind of incredible too. And, even though our talent comes from literally all over the world, which is a wild sentence, all of our production talent, all of our crew, that's all Albuquerque based. And I'm really proud of those guys for the work that they put in. Pro wrestling alive and well in the state of New Mexico. And just kind of wrap up that thought, in the 3 years that we've been doing this, the year we started, there was no WWE house show, there was no WWE television, there was no AEW house show, there was no AEW television, there was no TNA house show, there was no TNA television. There was Juggalos one time. With that said, fast forward 3 years, because of the resurgence, I feel like we spearheaded. In the past calendar year, we've had Monday Night Raw, we've had AEW Dynamite, we've had TNA's Impact, we've had the Juggalos, we've had the Midgets, NWA. Obviously, we do it all the time. I don't know if there's a better state in the union at producing really quality pro wrestling than New Mexico right now, and I hope everyone finds out about this hidden gem down here, because we're doing it in a special way, John.
Oh, I completely agree. And it's funny, you bring up before about, having too much oversight. I live in New York.
Then, yeah.
Oh, there's a reason why the joke's always been because of how lenient New Jersey is when it comes to, not needing certain things. A lot of promoters will run shows in Jersey that they do in New York. I mean, I know for a fact, like I said, I've spoken to many promoters over the years, and a lot of times they'll make the comment, especially being in New York, you walk into a show, 9 times out of 10, you're walking in negative without even, and the doors haven't even opened yet. Yeah. Because of the fact that you have, you have to pay for the ambulance, you have to pay for the doctor, everything kind of ends up.
And, and I'll say this, and, it's not for me to tell anyone how to follow their passion, but shows that rely on the gate it's tough. I mean, find your fiscal sponsors, find your community partners, like find those individuals that ensure you're going to be out the way. But you're absolutely correct. If it's New York, Missouri is pretty tough. Oklahoma here, Louisiana has a kind of a commission thing, but there's a couple states that make it tough to create pro wrestling. And, I think St. Louis, Missouri is a really good example. I know you're doing some work with them right now, but Missouri, because they're commissioned, there's really good pro wrestling in Southern Illinois. There's really good pro wrestling in East St. Louis. There's really good pro wrestling right there because it's minutes from St. Louis, Missouri. And that makes it really tough for guys like World League Wrestling, right? Like Leland Race and Trevor Murdoch, those guys, NWA territory, producing pro wrestling in Troy, Missouri. They have to battle that same stuff we have to battle here. But that's why the NWA is so very important, John, because we're able to bring in NWA level, some of the best in the world, constantly in the PWA top 500 talents to these communities because of our partnerships. And that's where that cost savings comes in, right? We're giving you top tier talent in the ring, and we're playing by the rules. So what we expect then is to have that support of those places we're in. And what does that include, right? That includes lodgers tax. That includes, a lot of those things that are made available via tourism by those states, because we're the ones who feed it, which is kind of an incredible thought. But the world of pro wrestling is not the 1 day and the 10-minute matches. The world of pro wrestling is the 30 days that surround it and how to make it happen, right?
Yeah, no, I completely get what you're saying. So now, when you guys started, did you guys start off as an independent company and then the NWA found you guys? How did that whole thing come to fruition?
That's a great question. So Duke City Championship Wrestling LLC is the company, right? So that's the thing we own. Obviously, Albuquerque is known as the Duke City, similar to the way that New York's known as the Big Apple, right?
Yes.
So we ran it for about 6 months, and it was really good. I could pull up the numbers if you wanted them specifically, but I'm ballparking. I think, we did our first show and there's probably 300 people there, and that's nice. Like, we're getting started, and we do our second show and there's maybe 315 people. We're going, okay, well, we're doing it, and we're on to third, fourth, and fifth, and I'm going, well, the crowd keeps growing. We're working on so a TV deal, which is really good. But the thing we keep hearing is, hey, really good presentation, really good venue. The stories make sense. But we're in a little bit of a desert talent-wise out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right? It was you have to fly to get here. Like, it's not the East Coast where you can put 4 bodies in a car, and because of the commission, everyone has to be, like you mentioned earlier, through a physical and blood tested and licensed beforehand. There's a bit of a production to it. So with that said, we're about 6 months in, I guess, and I also do media coverage for WWE. So I was flying out to Tampa. And I wanted to go to Tampa for the Royal Rumble. And so we had just had on our show a guy, this would have been the December show before, because the Royal Rumble was in January, right? So this would have been the December show before the Royal Rumble. So we had on Jacob Fatu, who's now in the WWE. So Jacob Fatu had wrestled for us in December of that year before headed to the Royal Rumble in Tampa. Whatever year it is, I think it's 22, the Royal Rumble. So, so Jacob's going out there because he's doing Major League Wrestling, right? He's still got one indie show left, and it wasn't known by the world, but it was known by me at the time that he's signing a WWE contract after that appearance. So we're his second to last appearance before he's exclusive to WWE. So I'm like, well, hey, I think he's giving me the pass, but I'm not going to say it. But I'm like, hey, Oos, I'm like, I'll come out to Tampa with you, I really want to meet. Obviously, I have to go work for WWE. I got to do the Royal Rumble, but I really want to meet Fight the World Pro Wrestling, and I really want to meet Brian Idol, because Brian Idol has been in the NWA forever, and Brian's a smart cat, and Brian is running in his indie promotion, which is an NWA territory, immediately following the Royal Rumble that following Sunday at a venue in Tampa. So I'm going to do the Tampa show, and then I'm just going to show up, right? Like, I'm going to pay the whatever it is at the door, I don't care, and then I'm going to go in there and say, hello, my name is Fred Sloan, I own Duke City Championship Wrestling. I really like an opportunity to meet Brian Idol. And so I met Brian Idol and Natalia Markova, who was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for a long time, or NWA Women's Champion for a long time, but not at the time. So I go in there and I say, hey, I got this really exciting thing out west, and I think we have all the components outside of NWA caliber talent. Is there a chance that you and I could sit down and have a conversation? He said, and I know everyone kind of knows how Brian talks, right? But he says, bro, got to do the show, bro. But I'm going to connect with you. And I'm like, I believe you. Like, there was, and in the industry, there's a lot of guys who pretend like there's pro wrestling. And then there's guys who are pro wrestling. And Brian Idol is pro wrestling. Yeah. So he calls me. And also, I don't know if he's good at anything else in the world. I don't know if he's a mechanic. I don't know if he's a cook. I don't know what his hobbies are. But he is he's on the Mount Rushmore of making pro wrestling happen. I promise you that. He's as good at pro wrestling as any human being I've ever met. So he calls me after the event, and I'm like, hey, I don't have a real pitch except I want you to come and see what we're doing. I was like, let's figure out getting you out here to Albuquerque. Let's have you debut. You're going to fight Hobo Hank. I want you to see the crowd's reaction, because at this point we're drawing 500 a show maybe, and that's kind of where our venue caps. We're just stuck at 500. And so anyway, so he comes out and it's a master class. It's hey, what would you do to improve here? What would you do this thing? And he's so forthcoming. He's and it's tickets and it's merchandise and it's lighting and it's I could give you a bunch of pro wrestling terms that make me sound really smart, but everything that makes a match work, right? And so he comes out and he's part of the deal. And I'm like, and we're eating dinner afterwards at the Frontier Restaurant, which is this super famous destination here in Albuquerque. And I said, what's the next steps? And he's like, come back to Florida. He's like, we do NWA tapings, come back to Tampa, meet Billy. Obviously, NWA now owned by Billy Corgan. He was like, let's figure out a plan. It took about 6 months, with travel and dates. And took about 6 months. We worked a deal. After that, we debuted that deal publicly the following January. So maybe a year total of 6 months negotiating, 6 months working, under the guidance, and then our public announcement. So that happened in January 23, I guess. Time flies, dude. And then January 24, whatever it is. And then we've been rocking and rolling ever since, which has been really great. And we've had talent on NWA Power, which is really great. Hobo Hank has performed. Pretty City Express has performed. A ton of NWA talent has come out here out west and performed, including Brian Idol and Natalia Markova and Mike Mondo, who just made an appearance with us, and Silas Mason, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, and the Country Gentleman, and Tiffany Nieves, the NWA Women's Champion. And I could keep going, right? Because how fortunate we are, even in our broadcast team, like Pollo Del Mar. Like, I mean, we got a lot of talent on screen now because of our partnership with the NWA. So, yeah, that is that relationship, and why Duke City Championship Wrestling is NWA New Mexico, and how very proud we are of that relationship.
Now, obviously, you mentioned with NWA. Definitely want to get into it a little bit, because especially some of the guys you've mentioned. But the one I want to look at first, actually, is Brian. We were talking about Brian Idol before. Obviously, at the time of this recording, he did win a title for you guys. I don't know if you want to announce what title it was.
Yeah, he has become the. It was such a funny story. Our anniversary. We do 2 big shows. Every show's big. Every show's big. But we're fortunate on our anniversary show, and we're fortunate in our December show to try to tell really pivotal parts of our story. So we can kind of bookend it around the 6-month cycle. And Brian, at that December show a year and a half ago, he won our Route 66 championship, and that's like our secondary title, right? That's like our intercontinental title, kind of.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he won that, and he did a really good job of representing it. And he's got really good social media, and obviously he works for a ton of promotions, including Puerto Rico. And he's that guy. Went to Australia. He's that guy. You know what I mean? So he did really great, and then lost it clean to Manny Lemons, which kind of set him on a different trajectory. And if you're not familiar with Manny Lemons, he doesn't have the East Coast name he should. Manny Lemons, West Coast wise, is what like Darren Corbin is to the Midwest. Like, he is as special as any indie talent in pro wrestling, and he goes over clean on Brian Idol, right? So he's the Route 66 champion, and he's carrying that thing for whatever that amount of time is. And then we get to the Birthday Bash 3 this past weekend, and our champion is Saleh Taylor, and Saleh for sale is part of the Anawahi family, right? So he's from the Seattle area. Obviously, his entire family is from the island of Samoa, but related to the guys you're thinking of, right? Related to Jacob Fatu, which is why we're able to have him on the show. We've had Journey Fatu. You recently had a conversation with 10 other Fatus, because there seems to be a million of them. And but the Usos and Roman Reigns and The Rock, all those guys. So For Sale had been the champion for some time, and he was up against a mystery opponent from the NWA. And that was kind of an interesting story to tell, right? Because Mike Mondo was already there. He's the national heavyweight champion, and he's going to fight Hobo Hank, because when the best come to town, they're going to fight the best we have, and that's Hobo Hank. And Saleh, when that bell hits and when that music hits and it's Brian Idol coming out, the crowd loses it. Like, they hate it more than anything, John. And earlier in the night, Thunder, who's we have not mentioned yet, so we're introducing a new individual here. He won the Route 66 title from Manny Lemons, right? Manny Lemons, who beat Brian Idol earlier in the year. With all that said, that makes Thunder the first in the history of Duke City Championship Wrestling to win both the heavyweight title and the 6'6" title. Well, then 35 minutes later, Brian Idol does the exact same thing as he beats Forrest Sale and becomes the heavyweight champion. So now the Duke City Championship Wrestling Heavyweight Championship is held by NWA former television champion Brian Idol, which is incredible for the value of that title.
No, it definitely is. It definitely will help bring in people. Will definitely bring views in, to say the least. But now, now when you do something like that, I've never actually asked a promoter this question. So
yeah,
this is the first time question I'm ever asking this.
Sure.
When you set up a story and it's a mystery opponent,
yeah,
does the other person actually know who it is beforehand, or is it legit a mystery until they come out to the ring?
Well, I think you can kind of do it either way, right? With our NWA contract, how fortunate we are to have access to talent that's going to be out here every single month that we shoot television. So our audience is aware, and our digital audience, so we're monetized on everything. It's important that our social media does well. Whenever we can tell you who's coming, we tell you who's coming. We want those likes, shares, and updos. Like, that means the world to us, literally monetarily. With that said, the NWA let me know not 36 hours ahead of time. Wow. And it was cool. Cool. Like, Brian already has a foothold here. Like, there's really good stories to tell with him. Let's go. But I do think on promotions that are in control of a lot of their narrative, and specifically John, promotions that don't necessarily have to worry about booking for their talent outside of their promotion. And I'm trying to say that like a little guardedly, right? But our talent here in NWA New Mexico, we're so very fortunate. They wrestle all over the country. So is everyone available every show we have? No. And that makes us get creative often. But I do think if you're in a situation where you're going to run every 4 weeks or quarterly or whatever at the KC Hall or the Armory or whatever, and you're going to have your set of guys, yeah, probably you have that one figured out. But if you're in a situation like us where it's Brian Idol gets booked all over the country, like, that's the truth. And now he's going to take that title with him all over the country. And that's a cool thing for us. So 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other, John.
No, I get that. It's just one of those things of, you always hear it with, the mystery opponent. And I always sit there and go, but do they actually know? But I get what you're saying, though. But, we bring up NWA. Obviously, right now, you mentioned Silas Mason before.
Yeah, he's the best.
He is the current NWA heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
And actually, if you think about it also, he's also the first homegrown talent since Billy Corgan took over the NWA, if you think about it for a second.
Yeah, I am going to think about it for a second. There's something interesting on the NWA right now. Every title holder is a Tennessee guy. Like, that's kind of an incredible thing. It's neat. It's a neat thing. Joe Kazana Promotions does a really good job. That's obviously they're in NWA territory too, but they're producing really great pro wrestlers, including Silas Mason, who's from Knoxville. But yeah, I'm going to pull up the list of it because I think you're right, and that's an incredible stat.
If you think about it, because you go through the past champions, you had Nick Aldis, who is not homegrown. You have Tom Latimer, who's bigger when it comes to like the European scene. He also had a stint with TNA. You had Cody Rhodes. People forget Cody did hold that title for a little bit.
Sure.
You had EC3 for a bit. EC3 everybody from TNA.
I have it here. Yeah, I just pulled it up. So in this order, Silas Mason currently, obviously, and he's had it for not quite 1 year. Tom Latimer had it. And also we're talking about a lot of one-time champions, which is kind of neat too. And Tom Latimer, who obviously is billed from the Philadelphia area, but is obviously international. EC3 you mentioned. The EC3 is interesting. He's moved on to TNA, had an NWA territory for a while, but I would say his most success professionally was in TNA, right? And for him to, I believe he has gone what he would call home. Tyrus, who's no longer really in the industry. Trevor Murdoch's the neatest human being I've ever met. Trevor Murdoch, who obviously was in WWE forever ago, just recently retired in the ring in Dallas, well, Forney, but Dallas, Texas. Runs World League Wrestling in St. Louis, Missouri, in NWA territory. The absolute best. And then, yeah, as you mentioned before that, Matt Cardona and Trevor Murdoch and Nick Aldis and Cody. Yeah, I mean, you're calling it. Tim Storm might be. Nah, Tim Storm's been around forever. I'm going with you. Silas Mason it is. You called it.
So, and it's funny when you think about it, and it shows you how big the NWA is, that it's taken them this long, and that Silas Mason is the first homegrown.
Yeah, well, if you go way back, I mean, because I'm looking at guys like, I mean, Colt Cabana was on the Indies forever, Christian Cage. I mean, there's a whole bunch of those really, Sting and Jeff Jarrett, AJ Styles, but like, yeah, I think you're very correct. There's, as far as the Billy Corgan era, it's definitely Silas Mason.
And not even that, look at the other side. Natalia Markova, who as of right now is the NWA Women's Champion.
Yeah.
Same thing as her.
Yeah, she's wild.
I've seen her wrestle a couple of times, and I've never seen somebody so athletic.
She's the smartest mind I've ever met in pro wrestling. And obviously she's from Russia, and here in the United States, and has had opportunity to do so much in pro wrestling, and she chooses the NWA. The NWA is better. This is similar. We were talking about fandom earlier. It's similar to the NWA is better because Natalia Markova chooses it. But she's a mind and a talent, and I don't know if you'd find a better combination of those two things anywhere, John. In a pro wrestler.
I look at this way. I'm gonna not outdate myself here, but people who are listening to this, hopefully they'll get the reference. There's a band called Motley Crue, just in case people haven't heard of them yet.
Yeah.
They had a song called "Looks That Kill."
Yeah.
That's basically Natalia Markova in a stint. That's
her and Brian Idol's little regiment. That's the name of their team. Looks That Kill. Like, he's the Looks That Kill Brian Idol. Anywhere they go, they demand attention. And speaking about rock and roll, when the Smashing Pumpkins tour, Billy Corgan brings pro wrestling on the tour. And when they insert it into the Smashing Pumpkins rock and roll show, it's Natalia Markova going out there and dancing and hitting cutters on Brian Idol, and it's the coolest thing you'll ever see, because pro wrestling is, like you said with the Motley Crue reference, pro wrestling is full of rock stars.
Yeah, and I mean that's the big thing. But we look at what they're doing. Obviously, the other big news is the move to Comet TV.
Yeah, super cool, right?
Yeah, that was the other big news.
Yeah, the Comet TV thing's neat because, and I was Comet. I don't know what people know. It's owned by Sinclair. Sinclair is a huge national broadcast organization. I was there in Dallas whenever the announcement was made that the transition to Comet, right? So it's at the Crockett Cup, which is the coolest thing. I'm so very fortunate. I do like meet and greet stuff, right? So it's I get to work with like Dave Crockett. I get to do some cool stuff, and we're there, and we're talking to Comet about it, and the Comet guys are saying, "Hey, we're really going to do it. Like we're going to put it in the same time slot that Ring of Honor was in years ago, and we're going to make sure excuse me as I clear my throat." They're like, we're going to make sure that we send this thing, to not just the moon, but outer space. Right. And I don't know what I can say publicly, but I'm going to say this. I know the numbers, and it's doing very well. So well that it's putting it like on their website. You know what I mean? Like it is through the roof successful. So yeah, that NWA Power and Comet relationship, which is Fridays and then replayed on Saturdays, just a spectacular little program.
I mean, we talked about before, obviously, you have NWA on Comet, you have WWE on Netflix, you have AEW on we talk about the other thing wrestling's always equated to is a buffet.
Sure.
And we see it now, but getting back to the NWA here, you talk about the Crockett Cup, and that's probably one of the more, I'm trying to think the best way to phrase this, probably more recognized tournaments.
I agree.
Out there.
I think it's the most significant one, and I wouldn't be surprised if like AEW or NWA as well, NWA will definitely, but if you do something with the Turner legacy as well, I think that should happen, but it won't have the impact that the Crockett Cup won because of the history of it. You know, it's been around for 70 years. I want to make sure I got this right because I was just there and I don't want to get the numbers wrong. But oh my gosh, yeah, it's been around. And I went to the one. This is so funny. I was at the one in Philadelphia last year too.
Yeah.
And this one they broke up over multiple tapings, right? So the Philadelphia one, it's the whole day Crockett Cup, and then the Dallas one from last year, it's no qualifiers. It's just the tournament, and it was like intense to watch as a fan, right? Because you get to see these guys go multiple times in a night, and John, like as a fan of the game, like how tough it is to not just perform once, but if you are so fortunate to go on and win the thing, you perform 7 times. Like
it's wrong. I mean, the one thing, and I still kick myself for it, is NWA was literally in my backyard for NWA 77 last summer.
Yeah.
And over in Huntington. And I had people, I know people who went to it. And I was sitting there and I'm like, I wanted to go so bad, but by the time I was trying to get tickets, I think that's sold out already. But the one thing I always try to do is whenever NWA comes to, especially in the New York area, I always try my best to make it, because I said this for a while when it comes to like TNA, for example. I feel like TNA has been the company that nobody really knew about because they weren't on the right channel. Now that they're on the right channel, I feel like now they can kind of go to NWA a little bit. And it's another guy you mentioned before, Mike Mondo.
Yeah, stud.
You were talking about a guy who made a total transformation.
Physically. Yeah.
Physically. I mean, how impressed have you been with what you've seen with him and obviously his tag team partner, Spencer Slade?
Yeah, Slade's wild. Slade is the next biggest thing in pro wrestling. He's got it all. Mike Mondo, who's just out here at Duke City Championship Wrestling, this episode hasn't aired yet, but for your audience, it'll drop in like the next month or so. He was out here, fought Hobo Hank, and I don't know if this sentence is going to make sense, but he's as good of a bad guy as any bad guy who's ever been bad. And and we're real fortunate. We got a crowd that knows they're part of the show, right? But he didn't just wrestle Hobo Hank. He wrestled Hobo Hank and 500 of his closest friends, and a guy who can jump in and do it. But he's a guy, came out with the Spirit Squad with WWE and, was on pay-per-views and, not all the matches in the world, but like a ton of managing and a ton of run-ins and a ton of pull-aparts and, backstage and vignettes, and a guy who knows the industry. And he's now at the top of it the way he should be, and he talked about Slade, but, he works alongside like Aaron Stevens, who's like a really brilliant mind in pro wrestling. And Mike Mondo doesn't hate kicking Smalls in the chest. And you go, this dude's incredible how much he can just sprinkle it onto everyone. Yeah, him and Slade are they're top tier, John. And if this was a program where I use swear words, I would have inserted one there because they are those guys.
Well, another tag team, and then again,
and I'm so sorry, it was the 40th anniversary of the Crockett Cup, so I'm so very sorry I didn't get that right.
Oh, you're okay. Another tag team, especially they've gotten a lot of push now. The Slime Balls have gotten a lot of push now.
They're great. They're every 13-year-old kid's favorite wrestlers, right? I don't know how else to say that. If you haven't seen them, watch them. They're so good. They're holding, like you said, the titles, and they're top tier. Like I don't want to even say a word about them because I don't want your crowd to get like, I don't want your audience to think, hey, Fred put them over to me, so I have to like them. Go like them on your own. But it's Slime Balls with the Z. And if there's a teenage boy in your life that you're trying to expose to pro wrestling, show that kid the Slime Balls because they will be their favorite wrestlers.
Fred, one thing, I always say when we do our regular show every Tuesday night, we'll give our opinions. We may say something of, we may like this or put this guy over. That's not us telling our, our fans, you have to go like them. So I've always said it for the last 5 years of doing this show.
Yeah.
Like who you like.
Do. Yeah, absolutely. And for the reasons you like. I think you're very correct. But yeah, check them out. Follow them on social media too. Like those guys are good. And then, they have a funny story. They've been birthed, I don't know what other verb to use, through the NWA, and they were territory enhancement talent that went over. They're the story of how you do the thing. Before we went to recording here to air, we were trying to do a live stream, but we had a technical issue. And one of the questions I saw on the live stream was, how does one get an opportunity to try out for the NWA? Well, find a territory. Like, go find a local promotion and say, hey, I want to come to your city. I want to, number one, I want to pro wrestle, but number two, I want to build the ring and set up chairs. And, I know how to be a pro wrestler. And then you find opportunity. Pretty City Express is a really good example. Those guys are based out of Phoenix, and they've wrestled with us for years now. And they went out to Tampa and got an opportunity in the Crockett Cup, and then did so very well in that. They got a tag opportunity on NWA Power on Comet. Are you kidding me? Like, it's wild, John, where pro wrestlers come from in 2026. You don't have to be the son of or daughter of someone anymore.
I mean, I will say one thing, though. I mean, you always see the one photo that goes around social media of Jimmy Hart, who some would say is a legend. And he's in his 80s now. And he's still putting up chairs and taking down chairs. And he's somebody who doesn't have to. He is somebody who can ride on his last name, ride on his success. And the one thing I always like telling, especially people who are first coming up into the industry, I can't speak as somebody who's been through it, but I've seen enough, and I've kind of, learned a lot of through the last 5 years doing the show. If somebody says to you, hey, I want you to go do this, don't say no. Obviously, if it's within reason. Within reason. And what I mean is this. You have somebody who, let's say they're an NWA, okay? And NWA is set to do, let's say they're doing the next anniversary show. And, you get to call, like, let's say you call them. And
sure.
Like, hey, we need you to go fly into Dallas ahead of the anniversary show. You're doing, X amount of days of media beforehand.
Yeah.
I've always had this thought process of don't say no.
Yeah, there's a lot correct about what you're saying. Can I tell a Jimmy Hart story real quick? So I'm a radio guy too, right? So I got a couple hats, and we have a Comic-Con here in Albuquerque, and it's pretty well attended. Maybe 30,000 people, that kind of thing over a couple days, and Jimmy Hart is there. Jimmy Hart has a booth, and I don't know if you've been to Comic-Cons, John, but if you have, cool. The audience is probably as well. So you have the booth, and you want to promo the event, and you want to have we do a panel, and I'm the guy. I'm like the microphone guy, and you and I talked before this, but I'm a little under the weather right now, so you're not getting big promoter energy from me. You're just kind of having a fun conversation. But so I was the afternoon drive guy. Jimmy comes on the afternoon drive show, and he's gonna not just put over that he's at the Comic-Con, he's gonna put over that movie stars are at the Comic-Con, and that pro athletes are at the Comic-Con, and that music is at the Comic-Con. And then while in the building, because radio stations are set up, there's the studio I'm in, and then right next door there's another studio, and he's like, well, can I go in that one too? And you go, yeah, that's the above and beyond, right? Like, you don't have to just do sports talk. You can go do pop and country and conservative talk. You go do all these other things. And then it's, as we're moving around town, he doesn't move around town in a blazer like you and I would. He moves around town in a Jimmy Hart blazer. When Jimmy Hart's in town, you might not know who he is, but you're going to know you saw him. So he's saying yes to people that aren't even asking him questions. And then, like I said, whenever the time does come for those questions to come in, you can be a pro wrestler, or you can pretend to be a pro wrestler. And I mean, the yes and the no to those questions kind of indicates if you're pretending or not.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I just feel like with me, and what I was kind of going back to is I've had a lot of independent wrestlers. I'm not, calling anybody out. I'm just speaking more in general terms here. When a podcast like myself or the other 800 podcasts come up to a wrestler and say,
"Hello, 800 seems like a low number. There's so many wrestling podcasts.
Okay, 801.
Yeah.
But like when a podcast comes up, especially somebody who is on that independency, who's not on that national level yet, and we never ask, you have to pay. No, a lot of times I sit there and say, hey, you want to come on to promote so-and-so event?
Mm-hmm.
I wish that was instilled more with people, because I feel like if you do that and you get to an NWA or an AEW and they do the whole thing like I was saying before with the media thing, and all of a sudden comment is, oh, no, I don't feel like it, you'll be back in catering in about 5 minutes.
It's interesting you say that. I'd have to pull up my email, but I think I probably get conservative number 100 applicants a month, maybe, to come and pro wrestle for us, maybe 100 a month. And I kind of always say the same thing. I think, shoot me your sizzle. Shoot me your sizzle, give me your bio, let's see. And then, because we don't make anyone's character in the NWA New Mexico. Like, your gimmick is your gimmick. Like, if you're hardcore deathy dude, you're not going to fit in here. You know what I mean? If you're not 18 years old, by law, you can't wrestle here. There's just some things that are going to exclude you. With that said, the number of guys that I've brought in who part of their sizzle reel is them doing media is almost 100%. Now, the number of guys who have sent me a sizzle reel that doesn't have media is much higher than the number of guys who have, but they don't get that same opportunity, because to me, if you can send me, even if it's just pics of you hanging out with kids at a Comic-Con or a state fair or whatever, I'm going to go, okay, this is a guy who gets it, or gal. I'm not trying to leave anyone out. But I would encourage every single indie wrestler out there to do two things in the world of pro wrestling. If you're willing to listen to me, who's never been a pro wrestler, I would say, number one, stop wearing black. Like, if everyone wears black, if you want to shine in the night sky, be a star, right? Like, put some color on your body and stand out. And then number two, include appearances and efforts in your sizzles, because that's the thing that goes noticed, at least by me. Because I already told you, John, I already sell at the building. Like, you don't trick me into thinking you're going to sell more tickets. You physically can't. I already sell them. Like, I need you to be able to grow my social media audience. I need you to be able to be that thing.
And that's the big thing that I've noticed a lot of wrestlers don't take advantage. Because you go back years ago, I'm talking back to like the days of Rock and days of Austin,
sure,
and Triple H and those guys, social media wasn't a thing.
Yeah, probably best at that time.
Yeah, so a lot of it was word of mouth and doing the talk shows and the radio interviews.
Yeah, there's a lot of people do that. Yeah.
No, but I see, but got a couple of last questions here for you.
You know what? Hey, you know what I would say though on that revisionist kind of look is, I'll tell you the thing that helped grow wrestling the most at that time period. You're talking about like the mid '90s up until like the kind of takeover that was DVDs then Blu-rays, was VHS cassette swaps. VHS cassette swaps are the reason that you know who Paul Heyman is. Like, VHS cassette swaps are the reason that fandom was able to grow to rural parts of the country that didn't have access to, at the time, broadcast television, or at the time cable television, because the infrastructure wasn't there. But every farmhouse in rural Kentucky had a VCR, and then that's where the parents of Ricochet grew up. You know what I mean? Because he had access to that stuff. So definitely consider that when you are looking back at the history of it. You're right, no social media. And yeah, it's cool to do Jay Leno, and yeah, it's cool to do Johnny Carson, but really cutting those promos before and after whatever pay-per-view, Bash at the Beach 96, because whoever's in rural Arkansas didn't get to see it until it was handed to them on a cassette, which was a wild time in wrestling. I kind of hate, John, that you didn't get to experience that. You handing two tapes to your buddy for one tape was the funnest Tuesday you could have. It was so great.
Unfortunately, I didn't get that experience. But, when we were talking on the phone a couple of days ago, we had met, I mentioned to you that I actually am good friends with the photographer of NWA, Jason Zupardi.
He's the best.
how important, this is going to be sort of a weird question, but I hope you see where I'm going with this. How important, as a promoter, is a photographer for a wrestling event?
The most. I mean, it's the most important thing. The yeah, he's a lovely human. I'm gonna pull up a thing for you real quick. I've been so fortunate in the world of entertainment to have been all kinds of cool stuff. Like, I'm not even trying to be braggadocious, and like had my photos taken at the coolest things with the coolest people. But this photo that Jason took right here of me in the NWA, and I'm just showing you on my phone, right?
Wow.
But this photo is my first like NWA like official photo, right? I should have shared my screen. I didn't think we were gonna bring this up. This is as important of a photo to me as my entire life. Like, and I know, like through his lens, he made it shine, right? But yeah, the stills, especially with the way social media exists now, and we have a little bit of a formula. I'll break the fourth wall for you real quick. We have 3 ringside photographers and 1 portrait photographer. So we have a lot going, and we have television, right? We do a really good television program.
Yeah.
So whenever we get our stills back, I don't distribute those from Duke City Championship Wrestling, NWA New Mexico. I give those to the talent, and then the talent does. And then, the caveat is they have to redirect their audience to our product and to our photographer. Yeah, but it's and I'll tell you who's best at it. And Jason's a really good example of this. Guys who know how to shoot live action, like guys who know how to shoot concerts, guys who know how to shoot sports, are really, really good. Hey, but I will ban you, like from the ring side, if you are fan camming. Like if you're like, I got whatever, I have the best iPhone you can get, right? I got the newest one. It's not what these guys can do.
Like,
yeah, it's like this 17 whatever doesn't have what they have in their Canon or their Nikon or the whatever thing they're passionate about. Yeah, outside of wrestling in the ring, I would say it might be the number. Really good TV. Really good TV team is important. And then after that, photography third. Maybe back of the house. They're all in the mix. They're all 1A, 1B, 1C.
But I want to give a shout out to Jason, who is one of the better photographers that I've seen when it comes to wrestling photos as well. When you're putting a show together, I know you talked before about, now when you're putting a show together, are you more into telling the stories? Or like, how does that process go when you're putting, a show together with the matches and everything?
You're talking about the writing aspect?
Yeah, the writing, yeah.
I think most of my consideration goes to, because we're making 2 products, right? We're making the live product at the El Rey Theater once a month, and then we're making the television product. So I think when I'm writing a thing, and it's a simultaneous creation, right? But it's 2 outputs. I think when I'm talking to the broadcast team, I'm talking to cameras, and I'm talking to our announcers, Fernando Gonzalez, Pollo Del Mar, the mayor of downtown, Chris Burnett. When I'm talking to these guys, I'm saying, and I'm on the broadcast a lot too, I'm like a little jack of all trades. But I say, make sure this is getting over to the YouTube crowd. Make sure that everyone on the internet knows this. And when I'm writing it for In the Building, I say, what's going to make the crowd react? Because we don't have the vocal of the broadcast, in the building. So I think I try to make sure we're making the live attending crowd be moved to emotion. And we do 8 matches a night. So I want to do that at least 8 times. And then, if we're doing it right, there's a promo in there somewhere too. And I don't hand everyone a microphone. This is not one of those types of shows. But if I'm out there making an announcement, or if someone, or if we're giving someone an opportunity to say something really important, to make sure the crowd can react to that. So I'll say it's 2-tier. Yeah, the thing I consider most though is the crowd in attendance and the thousands of people that choose to click play on us. Because it's awesome, John.
I can definitely say that. I did get a chance actually to catch your last, the show you guys just did. That was on YouTube.
Oh, great. Yeah, we do a weekly release, and it's neat because we always a little bit have a backlog. I think we have 4 or 5 in the can right now. And, they come out weekly, and it creates like a little destination. for people. And it's part of our algorithm. I don't know. I think we know what we're doing, but I'm not always right, John. I'm not always right at all.
I would say, do any of us really know what we're doing at this point?
We're all learning, and it's changing as we're learning, which makes
exactly.
it
Believe me, I've been doing the show now for 5 years, and stuff that started off 5 years ago isn't the same now.
No, Vine doesn't exist anymore.
No.
Like we got to figure it out.
All right, last question I got for you, and this is probably going to be the tough one.
I'm ready.
If you had an opportunity as a promoter, dream match,
okay,
any person, deceased or still alive, from any era, doesn't matter what promotion they're a part of, NWA, WCW, even if you want to go all the way back to the Von Erichs from back in the day, who would be your dream matchup?
I need a goal. What am I trying to do? I'm creating a live event and I'm doing it here in New Mexico?
Yes.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay.
30 years in the business. Regionally speaking, future New Mexico Sports Hall of Famer, Hobo Hank is, and if you haven't seen it in person, what I'm about to say is not going to make sense. But he is the most influential pro wrestling entity to ever be billed from New Mexico, including Mick Foley, who for years was billed from Truth or Consequences, right? But Hobo Hank is New Mexico. And I would have him wrestle, because you said living or dead.
Yeah.
I would have Hobo Hank wrestle in his retirement match against New Mexico Highlands University alum and El Paso native, which is, 20 minutes outside of New Mexico, but a big part of the Las Cruces, El Paso, 2.5 million people area. Living or dead, I would have Eddie Guerrero from New Mexico Highlands University, who famously wrestled there. It's the only collegiate wrestling program in New Mexico. Wrestle Hobo Hank at the historic El Rey Theater in front of 500 of the most dedicated fans in pro wrestling. And I would watch from the crowd. And what I do, John, at wrestling shows, which is going to sound crazy to fans, I don't watch the performance in the ring. I watch the crowd. I want to see, are people watching? Do people have their heads down their phones? Do people have their phones up recording? And I would watch the match, though. I would watch my best friend Hobo Hank wrestle what is arguably worldwide the best talent to ever spend significant time in in New Mexico, which is Eddie Guerrero. Wrestle each other. And it would be my shut it down day. I'd be done with pro wrestling. I would just shut it down. I would say thanks for playing, and I would offer it to you for whatever amount of money you're willing to pay, because I'd be done.
No, I get that, and that it's definitely, especially now, working with you guys now, Hobo Hank is definitely one guy who I definitely hope I can get on the show at some point.
Yeah, he's regular. He does all kinds of this stuff. They all do, and. If it's for sale, or there's some really big personalities, if your audience is so willing to follow us, I encourage them to fall in love with Tommy Two Scoops. I encourage them to hate Antoine Giovanni. I encourage them to get behind the underdogs that is sky high and watch them battle against every single human being who's bigger than both of them. I would say this, John, NWA New Mexico, a destination for really great talent, but also really great fans. So thank you for making the effort and covering us. Thank you for exposing your product to ours. We didn't talk about, which I want to do real quick before we go, is your involvement with the St. Louis Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and the Around the Ropes radio show and everything you're doing. What they do out there is wildly important. Do we use gimmick names on here? What's
gimmick names?
Yeah, I don't know his gimmick name. Help me out. Luke Roberts, is that his gimmick name?
Yes.
Yeah. So, like, what those guys are doing, and like Simmons and all those guys out there, it's important that they're recognizing pro wrestling and the mecca that St. Louis historically was. I grew up in St. Louis, and I know Luke Roberts really well. That's so funny to me. I know Luke really well, and the destination that St. Louis was, between Kansas City and Davenport and Chicago and Indianapolis and Gary at points and Memphis and Louisville, for all of that talent to always kind of amass there and tell stories the way they did for years. Now that there's an organization that celebrates all those people, just incredible. So I know you're gonna represent them really, really well. So thank you for being a part of that, and please let me know how I or NWA New Mexico can support you and they in that endeavor.
Absolutely, definitely will. And like I said before, having somebody like you on, and I said this before, we've worked with a lot of promotions over the last 5 years. But getting the opportunity to work with NWA New Mexico, with how much legacy NWA has, is incredible. And like I said, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. And anything we can do, we'll talk a little bit after we're done recording here, because I have, like I said, anything we can do to help you guys as far as like talent-wise, promotion-wise, you let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially, when the time comes that we come out east, and the east is smaller than the west, but NWA is about to be in Georgia, so there's a ton going on with that as well. And any of that fandom that finds you, they find you all over the country, so if at arm's length they want access, we're so fortunate to be able to give it often. John, you're the best. This was lovely.
I appreciate it, guys. For Fred Slow, I'm John. This has been another installment on the Round the Ropes Radio Show, and we'll catch you guys next time.